Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's RD2RD Live Show. My name is Megan Boitano, and I'm really honored to be joined today by Jen Draper. She's the owner of Body Trust Nutrition, and we are going to be talking about teaching gentle nutrition. And I'm really excited because we're not just going to focus on why intuitive eating is important, or the non-diet approach. We're really going to dig deeper into how do we help clients really apply and be part of their journey, because we know it's one thing to accept that we no longer want to, go on yo-yo diets, and we want to, approach intuitive eating or accept it. But it's another thing to help us work with clients collaboratively. So Jen is very experienced in this approach and has learned a lot over the course of a decade with clients. And so she's going to kind of give us a window into how she teaches and really kind of pull the veil back in how she uses this approach in her practice, so that you can walk away with some pearls, some practice pearls, and maybe some approaches that you haven't yet used. So thanks, Jen, for being here today.
Thank you, Megan. Aloha, everybody. I'm coming to you from Honolulu. So it's 7 a.m. I was going to say good morning, but it's not morning for everybody. So hi to everybody. And Megan, thank you so much for the opportunity to come talk about this way that I have learned to put intuitive eating into practice and really focus on this gentle nutrition part. I'm not originally from Hawaii. I was born and raised in California. I went to graduate school at the University of Texas in Austin. And so that's where I did, my undergrad was at UC Santa Barbara. There's no nutrition program. So I majored in sociology and exercise science. And then I found nutrition a little bit later. So my story is like going the longest way around, but eventually getting to the exact spot at the right time for me. So I did a coordinated program while I was finishing my graduate work. And then I was like this unicorn. I got to start doing private practice right away. I joined a group. I was still finishing grad school, and there was a group of dietitians in Austin that were doing intuitive eating, and I got to do the jobs they didn't have time for. Like I went to the rehab center an hour outside of town, adult rehab. I was teaching classes to the state troopers. And I landed in this thing that was really natural for me. But since that time, I made my way to Hawaii, and most of my career I've worked with eating disorders. And now I worked in all levels of care, residential down to IOP. Now I'm just doing outpatient. And I also teach classes at the University of Hawaii and the online classes through the University of Maryland. So,
wow.
Yeah, so that's my little messy little path.
So, following up, kind of, how did you really discover, so you went right into a practice that had an intuitive eating approach, but really, how did you discover, were you attracted to that type of work? Give us a little background about how you became kind of passionate about intuitive eating and a non-diet approach.
So I actually never went on a diet. When I was growing up, I was in a family of dieters. Like all the women always talking about their diets. They were either on a diet, talking about the next diet, or they were talking about who was on a diet.
Got it.
So much conversation, and it just, I would like sit with my grandma and my mom and my auntie and think, this doesn't make any sense. Because I watched them lose weight, gain weight, go on diets. My grandma had that magnet on the fridge. I start my diet on Monday. And she did. On Monday, if I was at grandma's house for a vacation, Monday morning, she'd have her diet food. And so I always just paid attention and thought, this doesn't make any sense. And so I really rejected it just for myself. And I always had a great connection with my hunger and fullness cues. And so I was an intuitive eater. And when I was getting my doing all the coursework to be a dietitian, I was like, why are we talking about diets? Diets don't work. Like I was already thinking like, this doesn't really make sense. And I had that moment, like, can I even be a dietitian? Because I can't do weight management. Like I can't put someone on this diet and focus on that. Like it just was a little bit hard. And then, excuse me, in my internship, I found the intuitive eating book. And one of my classmates in her internship, she interned with the dietitian I ended up working with. And so we were like, did you know about this book? And I was like, oh, okay. Now I know dietitians can do this and I'll be okay. And it just made sense to me because I had always been an intuitive eater. And so then having a mentor who was implementing it really helped me just like hit the ground, like start it right away.
Nice. And you mentioned that you've, worked at all levels with eating disorders. How did you, I guess I'm curious, how did your practice develop in that way? I know there's a lot of people who maybe want to work in eating disorders or, see that those, intuitive eating and, eating disorder work are often linked to one another. I'm just kind of curious about that aspect.
Yeah, that's a fun question to answer. So I was in Austin and I was an older student, right? Because it was like my second time in school. So I was already in my 30s and really intentional about networking with people, like getting to know. Austin's full of dietitians because they have a great program. And so it's a little crowded. So I was just doing my good work of getting to know people and thinking about like where I could find a job. And then some things changed and I ended up moving to California. But part of that was because I wasn't getting any jobs in Austin. Like my classmates got the jobs, which I was happy for them. Everyone's like, wow, Jen didn't get any of the openings. And along the way, when I was still in Austin, the dietitian that I worked with was friends with Dr. Anita Johnston, who she wrote a book called Eating in the Light of the Moon. It's a really popular in the eating disorder world. So she's kind of one of the pioneers. And so she said, I met her at a talk and she said, oh, you work with these dietitians. If you ever want to come to Hawaii. And I was like, that sounds so crazy because I live in Texas and I'm still in grad school. I was like, come to Hawaii. So fast forward a few years and I was in California, again, looking for work. I finished school, moved back home with my family, looking for jobs, finding nothing. And then I had an aunt that was living in Hawaii at the time. And so I was like, well, if you don't have a job, it's a good time to go travel because when you get one, you don't have time off. So I went to her. I was going to go visit her and still do my job search, right? Every day I had my Excel sheet, all the things I was doing to try to find a job. And I know a lot of dietitians now with COVID or new dietitians are feeling this. Like, yes. Where did I was just like sending resumes into black holes, basically. And I didn't know anybody because my graduate work and school was in Texas. So I was like, so then I just looked something up for Anita and she was doing a training in Hawaii the same time I was going to be there. And so I was like, oh, maybe I'll meet someone who knows someone in California that can just, still trying to find something. And the end of that long story is that I ended up connecting with Anita and she said, I'm going to need a dietitian on Oahu. I went to Maui first. That's where my auntie was. So I stayed there for a few months and then I got a call and he was like, my dietitian's leaving. Do you want to come? And so it was really it was still that like putting all those feelers out and connecting. And years later, when I reflect on it, that dietitian in Austin that I really got to know was connected to this therapist who it still was that networking that we have to do. And I think of it more like we're just letting people know us and right. What our skill set is. So I remember a friend was like, wow, you're Anita Johnston. Like you're one of her dietitians. And I was like, I'm the only one. I had no experience. Just the little experience I had in Austin. And I was like, but I had great training and mentors that helped me. So
I think that that's really valuable. I think just the, networking and the struggle of finding work. I think a lot of us have this, idea that, it should be a certain way. So I actually really appreciate that you shared that maybe it wasn't such a linear path. So how you mentioned, okay, like you didn't have specific experience, like you started working. How did you learn, I guess, this whole teaching aspect of gentle nutrition, teaching the intuitive eating approach, and then, we'll kind of start to dive into this fuel mix approach that you developed. So maybe you can give us the early stages, maybe when it wasn't going so well.
Yeah, so it was learning how to talk about it so I learned it and created the fuel mix approach with the eating disorder groups I was doing. And I learned a lot, you learn a lot on the job when you're new. And so I had my ways that I had taught groups when I was in Texas, which was just like gentle nutrition to me is just teaching the essential nutrients, what our body needs. Like it's just a very matter-of-fact way to say, this is what we need. And we don't need to get connected to all the worries that are out there. Like, did I have enough superfoods? Is this an antioxidant? Did I have enough fiber? All this, like, there's just so much information that's not helpful and people get really overwhelmed. So I would be talking with the clients and they would make a face like, and I was just like, okay, what did you just hear me say? And they're like, I just heard you say that I can never eat saturated fat. And I was like, okay, that's not what I meant. So I started to hear through their filter, right? In an effort to give them good care and just recognizing how the way that we were taught to talk about a lot of nutrition can be overwhelming. Our eating disorder clients are super sensitive. And so if it works for them, it's good for everybody, right? So I started just talking about like, okay, it's just a fuel mix. It's all you have to think about is this little part, and it opened up a whole, like it just gave them permission. But it was really the other thing specifically for like the eating disorder clients struggle with is connecting to their bodies. So it was just a way to say like, your body, you can trust it. It's really complicated right now, and it doesn't really trust you, but let's work on rebuilding that trust. And so I'm so grateful to all of those clients that just would let me go there with them, and I remember, Megan, early on, there was a client who we're in a group and she said to everybody, hey, you guys, you know what? Jen's actually not full of shit. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, no, she knows what she's talking about. And I was like, oh, because they used to say like, I don't know. I mean, she was like, she's not full of it. Like she knows what she's doing because it's working. And that was the first time that they're like, oh, we're going to listen to what Jen's saying. But it was so funny. I was like, wow, not this whole time. So it was a lot of time kind of in the trenches with clients who were really struggling, and I was struggling to figure out how to support them.
Right. And I think you brought up a point there about, body cues. And one of the things that I see commonly, and one of the things I know, you include in your teaching is I don't feel like I don't really feel hunger and I don't feel fullness. Like you're asking people to tell you their hunger and fullness cues and they don't even know what those are. They're completely, they don't know anymore, right? How that approach is this part of the way you teach gentle nutrition. Maybe you can kind of give some explanation of, when you're working with, new clients, how this often happens for you.
Yes, that's really important. So it's, we have these principles of intuitive eating that say, honor your hunger, feel your fullness. And I would say 95% of all the clients I've ever talked to about with this say, I can't feel anything. My cues are broken. They're like, okay, that sounds great, but I'm broken and mine don't work. And so, so that's where we start. And they feel really worried and discouraged. So we say like, okay, there's this thing you'll be able to do when you can feel them, but first we're going to practice how you connect. And even that I've learned to just, prepare them. Like, it's going to feel clumsy. You're not going to feel anything. It's okay. I just want you to start checking in with your body and see if there's anything there. And we talk a lot about like dialing in a radio. Sometimes with my younger clients, I have to explain like what it was like in a car, tuning in a radio station.
Yes.
Like, have you ever done that before? Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, let me tell you how that went. But we're looking for a signal, and just the looking helps. And so I'll even tell them, if you can't feel anything and you're mad, that's okay. Be mad at me. And they'll come back and say, Jen, I was so frustrated. I'm like, oh, good, you did the practice. And then just within a number of days, they start feeling. And what the other part that is confusing is that it's not one size fits all. Like, everyone's cues are going to show up a different way. So they're looking for like a strong growling, but they don't feel that. What they feel is tightness in their chest. And then after they eat, it goes away. So it's like so individualized. And they had all those cues before, they just didn't know.
Got it. So in general, I think, dietitians being very, type A in general, want to put our client sessions on a schedule, right? Visit 1, we're going to cover X or Y or Z, and we're going to reach, by the second visit, we're going to be on to, this topic. In your experience, how long does it take for these hunger cues, and how long do you stay and work on this element of just being able to recognize, like, where does that fit into then moving on to other, and how do you not lose clients who are, this isn't working, like, just I'm gonna go back, and they hear their friend who just started a new keto or the next, how do you handle that? Because it's real, it does happen.
Yes, it does. And it's a lot of preparation for the client to know what to expect. And a lot of my language with them is intentionally to say, this is how it's not a diet. It feels weird because that's what you're used to, but this is the plan. And so I've learned that along the way, because otherwise it would be exactly what you said. I tell them all these things, they're excited, they go back, they can't figure it out. They come back for one more session and then they're gone. Now I have clients that I see for years, twice a month, who are still like, they're doing so well, but they still need the practice and the support. So how do I do it's actually kind of an intuitive counseling, right? Like, it's an intuitive nutrition counseling where you're checking in with a client and figuring out what they need. So I always have, in the first session, I will recommend that they're eating protein. So I send them off with something, and the protein is the only of the macronutrients that has a number. And they need that. They need a lifeline. Like, they just need like something to hold on to go. And so, but I also know that eating the protein will help them feel the cues. So it's eat the protein and see what you feel. And then
it's like an exercise, right? It's like a little bit of homework.
Have a little action step, a little something to do. And the discovery of the body cues is kind of overarching the first handful of sessions. We're like, okay, try this thing. What happens if you gave yourself permission to eat that food? Did you notice your cues? So it's a much more gentle rollout of what we're doing. And the way that I set it up is to tell them we're going to work on this one thing. And we decide together what it is. What is the protein you're going to eat? What food are you going to try? And then they're going to do a deep dive into how the experience was having it. And then they come back and we just celebrate that one thing. Like, look what you did. And I have learned to say, like, I just want you to try this one time before I see you again. Like, I'll see you in 2 weeks. You only have to do it once. And then they come back and I say, how did it go? And they're like, Jen, I did it 3 times. I'm like, you are incredible. What? 3 times? Because sometimes as dietitians, we get too locked into, you have to do this every day. This is good for you, and you have to do it every day. And then,
or every meal and every snack, and
they're so overwhelmed. So it's setting them up to really succeed. And if it doesn't go well, then there are times where they come back and like, this is what happened. And I'm like, oh, I never expected that would happen. Okay, let's just figure out, like, let's see how you got there. Oh, you had this terrible news and then you were really upset, and that wasn't the time to practice that thing, right? So we always can, whatever they come in with, we can use, but I just give them one new thing. And then sometimes it's, okay, keep practicing that. And they come in after weeks working together, they'll say, I don't know what we're doing. I don't know. I need a plan. I need this. They're just like, where is my diet? And I'll say, wait, didn't you tell me last week that you were able to stop eating when you were full, even at a family gathering with all this food, and you just gently pushed your plate away and you weren't stuffed and sick? Didn't you say that you could feel this? Like, I start telling them and they're like, oh, yeah. I was like, you just forgot all your progress. But that worry of like, what are we doing? I'm not making progress. And it's mostly tied into, I want to be losing weight, right? Because I don't use weight as a marker for success. We're looking at how their relationship with food is changing, how they're feeling. Remember, you had so much energy to play with your grandkids. Remember when you weren't so irritated with your spouse? So I'm highlighting what they're doing. And it's like, we just have to kind of retrain them to look for results that are not what the diet industry would call results. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's interesting, you call the approach that you use, my fuel mix. And I think, there can be some aversion, like a dietitian will go, oh, wow, there's a macro target. Can you talk about why you chose, I guess, to call it that, and how that kind of comes into, the approach with clients, like what happens next? Okay. So first, why don't you talk about that and then I'll ask another question.
Okay. So it was really those early days when I was working with these eating disorder clients, and I just like some of my messages are like, calories keep us alive. So we just need to get the energy in your body, and it's fuel. Like this food that you're so afraid of is the fuel for your body. And you need to eat all of we need to have the whole mixture of it because they're essential for life. Right? Like the ones who are terrified of carbs, I'm like, carbs feed your brain. They help your heartbeat. They feed your red blood cells. Do you know what your red blood cells do? Don't you want them to be fed? That's why we need carbs. And then I focus on things like, so it was with what I teach, I'll have something to help them notice. Like when you ate the carbohydrate, you could focus. When you ate the fat, you felt more full. When you ate the protein, you felt this. So it was just a way to say, this is the fuel our body needs. And we want to focus on getting all of it because it does these great things in our body. It helps regulate our blood sugar. It helps us know we're full and to stay full. And it really helps our mood. And clients love to hear about the happy chemicals we get, serotonin and endorphins and dopamine. So it's just like our bodies run off this fuel and we need the mixture of it. And there are no foods that are good or bad. Like all foods fit into it. That's one that clients get great relief. They're like, wait a minute. So you're telling me that any food could be in this? Like, yeah, it could be anything. And so they feel so much relief, but they also feel really secure. So it was just a very natural way to say, like, did you know that our body needs this? And the truths about physiology don't change, right? Like the way your body needs nutrition never changes, even with all the diets and the new information you're hearing.
Right. I love that. So if we kind of, together, well, I know you're the resource that you created, the client workbook, which I think is spectacular and a great resource, because I think, it has those, what are the macronutrients? What do they do in very non-threatening language, right? In an objective, why do we need carbohydrates? Why do we need protein? But I think there's a lot of similar resources out there, which I think clients need that education about, without focusing on, maybe the negative parts. But you also go through kind of these questions and reflection elements. Why in the tool you use do you feel having those extra elements is necessary?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I just want to say, as I'm hearing your question, I need to say that I had a really unique experience working on a treatment team with Anita Johnston. Because she uses metaphor, and it's all about like what's really going on and what's deeper. So sometimes when I talk to other dietitians and they're like, how did you know to do that? I'm like, oh, because I had this really unique mentor who respected me as a dietitian, but I learned that this other part that we're not taught of like, what else? How is it connected? If you're having a hard time with that, what else was going on? Because in our dietetic work, we don't learn a lot about emotions, and I definitely don't do any therapy. Like I'll tell clients, I can identify feelings and I can look at connections. Like dietitians were so good at patterns. So I could notice a pattern, but then the therapist does the processing, right? So it's not that I try to do therapy, but I learned from really good therapists. I also learned from all the mistakes I made, where they'd be like, Jen, you just validated her fat attack. And a lot of it I learned just in that messy way that it's trial and error. So I've had that unique guidance of what else and how do you connect, and have you ever been able to do this? And so that has really influenced how I do motivational interviewing. But it's taking it back to the connection of like, when I had this thought and I ate this way with the food, what else was going on? So this is like when clients are worried about being addicted to sugar, or I'm like, okay, I know that you think it's a thing. Here's why I don't. I've never known that somebody would break into 7-Eleven to steal a Slurpee. Like people who are addicted to chemicals, they steal and lie and cheat and do really rough things because they have an addiction, right? You don't break into someone's house for sugar. So that's kind of a playful way to talk about it. And then usually it's something like, this was the food that I had with this family member and it was so special. And I'm like, okay, go talk to your therapist about that. But do you see, it wasn't really, the sugar got all the credit, but it was your relationship with sugar. So the reflection question, so each, in the workbook that I created with a lot of support from Megan, I need to shout out, if you're interested in making your own digital work, Megan is really good support. So thank you, Megan. It would not have happened without your help and deadlines.
Well, it's brilliant.
So just always having like, here's what we're talking about, but then bringing it back to the client. What is your unique experience? What are your thoughts about this? What are your worries? So it's still helping them connect, right? And then we have to connect with, like, we're not just eating in these little chambers. We're like out in the world having a life, and all the different ways food is part of a full life. And when someone's not obsessed with what they don't have obsessive thoughts about food, they can connect in relationships. We're just guiding them. But I recognize that I had some pretty incredible mentors. I also did a lot of trainings with Carolyn Costin. And for Carolyn, it was a lot like learning more like how the client with the eating disorder thinks about things. I didn't have an eating disorder, so I didn't have that experience. So having a mentor who was recovered even helped me like, oh, when I say this, that's what they heard. But the reflection, it's always just helping them connect back. And then they get to build this trust with their bodies, and they see that they're not out of control. They see that there's a pattern. If they only ate a donut in the afternoon, they got really tired and grumpy. But if they had a different snack in the afternoon, they felt better. And then maybe the donut's kind of fun to have on Sunday when you don't have to think, right? Like there could be a place to have something yummy and be sleepy, but it doesn't set you up in the workplace. So it's really it helps with the collaboration to know exactly how we can help them when we get the responses from their questions. And then they start to realize that they're really the expert. Like they know their bodies the best because they live in their bodies, right? And that's like, we're the experts on what happens with carbohydrates, but they know how it happens in their bodies.
Yeah. I appreciate that you've mentioned so much of the mentors that you had, the trainings that you went to, and honestly that you maybe slipped up right early on, or you said the wrong thing. I think we're really worried. It was, not recently in a group, someone, posted, I think I totally messed up. Like I finished the session and I coulda, shoulda, woulda done all these things. And, looking at you, someone who, clearly is very skilled in this, has lots and lots and lots of sessions under their belt and can, see a response coming, and you already know. And I think it's really helpful to hear, you share more of how you got to where you are, and that it's okay to stumble and bumble, but it's also important to get the appropriate mentorship and training and education to help you become, more skilled. So this is really helpful.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So as I kind of want to talk about, switch, not necessarily switch gears, but this non-diet, food freedom, intuitive eating, I don't want to say they're more recognized, but they're kind of more trendy. And I see it, as we always talk about, marketing and attracting our ideal client. And I sometimes see it in almost, it's being used in very strategic, marketing ways as well. And I guess I'm curious, do you see any distinctions among those approaches? What trends do you see? What concerns do you have? I'm just curious, as someone who kind of practices in this field, what are you seeing as an observer and as a part of this, current state?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's there, we do have all these new words. And for me, when I conceptualize the non-diet approach, my practice is rooted in the principles of intuitive eating and health at every size, right? So the health at every size part opens up another aspect of accessibility to care, like harm that could be caused if we're being fat phobic. Like it opens up more even, like social concerns, all of that. There is definitely a big trend of people using intuitive eating for weight loss. And I like to think they don't know. I mean, just the weight loss industry is such a big business. I don't know the number for 2020, but it's usually like 60 to 80 billion a year coming in. So even to know, like sometimes we definitely have dietitians who have their own eating issues. And so they're fixated on something that would be harmful, but they think it's intuitive eating. Right. So sometimes we have it. I think of that as like the wolf in the sheep's clothing. Right there. And I think they mean it from a good place. They just have their own battle with food. The other thing that I hear about a lot, just in the social media groups that I'm a part of, there's definitely a worry from dietitians who don't practice this approach that it means we don't care about nutrition, that it's anything goes. This even goes for the health at every size. And it's two different issues. Like there's a civil rights part of it that says people can be in big fat bodies and not have health. People can be in thin bodies and not have health. Like we're not in charge of people's health. And we don't get to dictate that. But if we're meeting with somebody as a health provider, we can have health in different body sizes. So it's kind of like separating out people are allowed to smoke. We can't stop them. I just ask them to have more vitamin C. Like, could you try this? So noticing that there is still diet culture, and we want to be careful with that. And I think there's more, like what I'm learning more about is even the term weight inclusive is saying there's one group to be a part of it and we'll include you. And so better language is weight neutral. Or instead of like body positivity, which that's a movement that like came from Black women, but it's been kind of commandeered by like Black fat women, but it's been commandeered by a lot of thin white dietitians. That's like a whole week we could talk about all that. But it's more like body acceptance or even body liberation. Like there's just like deeper roots to some of this. I think that's where we're headed, is like a movement that is like really supporting all bodies, and supporting access to care that's really helping people and not harming. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would really appreciate kind of the way you summarize some of those. They're not necessarily all in competition with one another, and some of them are, I don't want to say there's a lot of right overlap, wrong word, right word, that a lot of us are doing very similar work, but perhaps sometimes not necessarily pitted against one another, but that ultimately more access, right, to care and focusing more on that, you know, we can't necessarily make somebody healthy, right? That's kind of a difficult term to necessarily to put in our tool belt. Well, I'm going to whip out the nutrition health wand and just whip it around.
Yeah.
But I'm curious also, our own clients and people who are seeking nutrition care coming, to us. How do you, introduce the concept of, in obviously intuitive eating and this gentle nutrition approach? Can you talk about maybe when you're introducing this as an approach, when it goes well, and maybe when you go, okay, you're not ready, or because I think we see this as, I don't want to say necessarily a social justice and some of these things around, weight, inclusive, weight neutral, that we're not necessarily trying to necessarily convince. How do you gauge that? Because you want people to be successful. So how do you say you're not there yet, or do you turn them away? I guess I'm curious about your approach.
Yeah, great. Excuse me, great question. So it's the way that I think about it is we're always going to meet the client exactly where they are, and we don't like, it's not up to us if they decide to work with us or if they continue. Like you said, like we don't have that wand that can just have them do everything. So often clients come and they want to lose weight, and even if like they've done diets or whatever's happening, and so we just acknowledge that, like, yes, I understand, I just don't have a way to do that doesn't harm you, because the research shows this. And usually we just turn it back to their own experience. Like, in your own experience, what's happened when you dieted? And they most of them have gained back more weight, and like they over the years of dieting, they've gotten heavier. So we acknowledge that, and I educate on health at every size and why I don't prescribe diets, because they make people fatter. Like they're the best predictor of weight gain. So that doesn't, like if you wanted weight loss and the diet's going to make you gain weight, that's a terrible approach. So I educate on that, and then I just invite them in. Like, is this what you'd like to do? And to give them permission that it's okay to still want to lose weight. Even the ones I see for years, we still talk about it. To say, Jen, my coworker lost all the weight on keto, and I saw that this person did in the media. And I'm like, I know that you still want that, but we know that we're working on your health. And let me remind you all the progress you've made. Let me remind you all these things. So we can still talk about it, and it doesn't have to be so militant. Like, you have to eat, like, food freedom doesn't mean you can't still have quinoa. Or if you want, I'm still introducing the nutrition part. So I think meeting them where they are, and sometimes they move forward and move back. So a client I've worked with for maybe 6 months, 9 months, she just wanted to start counting calories. And I said, the reason I don't recommend that is because it disconnects you from your body cues. And she's like, I just need some idea, because I think that on my own, I'm eating way too much. Like, let's say she's eating like a 2,000 calorie breakfast or something. She wasn't having that much, but like, I just need a gauge. And so I was like, you know what? And she said, I was on this Facebook group for intuitive eaters, and I couldn't talk about it. They like shut me down and kicked me out. And I was like, oh, but you're your own person. And if this is a tool that's helpful, I'll tell you my concerns. And my hope is that we won't keep doing this, but if that helps you today, you're allowed to, right? You're allowed to do what's helpful for you. I'm always going to tell you. I even have clients while they work with me that go on diets. Sometimes they stop, sometimes they come back, and I'll just say, I have to tell you all the things I'm worried about. And they said, I know you would, Jen. And then when it doesn't go well, they're like, well, it happened. I'm like, I know it happened. So as long as I'm sharing the sound nutrition that I believe in, they're allowed to come with whatever they want. Sometimes they say, I want to lose weight. And I say, you have that option. I'm just not the one to help you. So I do have some that even after a phone call, before we ever meet, they'll say, no, no thanks. But most of them, we just move slowly, and they have to move through they're so connected to the diet culture that it takes a long time to untangle.
Yeah. I think a lot of things kind of stood out there as far as that relationship, and, relationships they take time, right? They take, space for things that maybe you have to be able to share things that maybe are not as pretty as we want other people to see. So I think a lot of what stood out there is that safe space to, you said, go on a diet, right? Like a relationship, someone's going to allow you to maybe step into some mud, is going to allow you the space, but also kind of hold for you some boundaries and be there to kind of when you step back. So I think there's a lot of that journey that, you mentioned in the outset about intuitive eating and being a journey where people may go back and forward. And I think so much of this is, learned over time, and the mentors that you had, and that recognition, and just who you are as a clinician. So it's been, super, really interesting. I want to make sure that we have time to dive into, the My Fuel Mix resource that you have, as well as what you might offer to, dietitians who are interested in, learning from you. So for those people listening in, can you tell them what you have a guide, like basically the tool you use with clients, which is the educational resources, reflection questions, and then you have like a resource for the dietitian that kind of you would keep to help you apply, kind of taking what you learned over the last many years and kind of distilling it down to be more accessible to maybe less experienced clinicians. Tell us about it.
Right. So, and I don't know if I already mentioned this, My Fuel Mix is protein, fat, and carbs. Like that's the whole framework. So it's all breaking that down. So the workbook is a really good overview of nutrition. And it's what I teach at university level. Even the language, that's how I teach it to classes, right? So it has all the little gems of how I say it that just help us know, like, how do we put this into words that are accessible to people? And it does have the reflection question, action steps, and lots of education for that client who's seeking that. Definitely the dietitian could use it to help guide their journey. And then I created a dietitian companion. So it's like if you're a school teacher, you have the teacher's edition. So you get like this extra edition for the dietitian that's like for the reflection questions, I just wrote a lot of like ways for you to take it. Like if they say yes to this, here are some things to ask. If they say no, here's a lot more things. So I really just thought, like, what do I say to clients? And it's a starting place, because even having a tool, if you don't know how or start, or we just get worried that we're not going to be perfect at it. And I make mistakes often, and I own it with clients. I mean, sometimes we have a goal and they come back. I just do it as an experiment. Go try this. And they come back and I'm like, oh boy, whoops. Okay, let's try again. But I'm not attached to the outcome. We're just trying. So the workbook is a resource to use with the clients, and then the guide for the dietitians to really help the dietitians feel confident and a starting place. And you certainly could take it your own direction. And then I also have a mentoring program for dietitians that I just started it. This is what came out of my pandemic, getting to prioritize some business things. So I started it with some dietitians in Hawaii, but I do a program that
Can you offer a residential program? I'd like to go to Hawaii for about 6 months. Kidding.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine dietitian training in Hawaii? Maybe we'll do some workshop things in the future. Yeah. That sounds fun to think about. So I have this mentoring program I started that really to help with eating, like supervision for eating disorder dietitians and the non-diet approach. So again, when we think about how to do it with eating disorders, it translates to everybody. Like, so I teach it from like, here are the hardest of the hard. Anyone else you'll be able to handle. And I'm also working on, it's not ready yet, but some kind of coursework that I'm going to do for dietitians. Like, I don't know if it's going to be a 3-month, like a 3-month group or mini course with pre-recorded. I'm still trying to figure out what people would want. But I have coming.
So people who want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, so the best way would be to visit my website, bodytrustnutrition.com. And I have an area for dietitians. And so you can just book a discovery call and we can have a conversation. And I'm happy if you're not even sure, if you just have a question, like I have this question about this, I'm happy for you to get in touch and see what's happening with your practice and how I can give you some wisdom. I'm heading into a new season in my practice where I'd like to invest more into dietitians and not work. I've had some really hard clients over the years, so I'm ready to pass them on and support the dietitians that are doing that work. Yeah, adding this new season.
Love this. Jen, I really appreciate that you kind of walked us through, your approach to teaching gentle nutrition and that kind of importance of talking about the fuel, right? The proteins, carbs, and fat. And I think the work that you're doing is important, and definitely the resources that you've created, I just give major. I'm really thankful when dietitians take the time to distill down what they've learned into resources that really help other people shorten that time period to kind of learn those skills. So thank you for doing that. And everyone go to bodytrustnutrition.com. Check out Jen's website. There's a for dietitians area. And thank you for being here on today on a momentous day for us here in the States. And I will, I'm sure, be following up with you.
Megan, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. We'll be back next month talking with Melissa Azaro Groves about how to market your first group program. She has a very successful both online course and group program. So we're going to dive more specifically into the group program since they are a little bit different. So that'll be a fun one to hear from her specifically on the marketing side. All right. Have a wonderful morning for you. And chat soon.
Thank you. Aloha.
Bye-bye.